And if we can kind of lift that veil or just pretend for a second, put on like our big girl pants, right? Our empowered woman pants, and just say like, okay, what other possibilities am I willing to see here?
Today's guest is Holly.toronto, who is a master coach helping women stop prioritizing other people's expectations of beauty, belief, and behavior so that they can live their life from a place of wholeness, fully aligned with the truth of who they are. In this episode, we dive into the good girl programming and how to outgrow it. We go into how we can move past the good girl story into a more empowering and intentional way of being, as well as the 5 manifestations of the compliant woman programming and how to get out of them so that you can stand in your power, as well as why and how we women tend to play small and doubt ourselves and experience jealousy, self-neglect, and imposter syndrome, and also what you can tangibly and practically do starting today to step into your authentic power more fully, as well as some ways in which the personal development industry is encouraging bypassing and an overcompensation that might not be necessarily healthy or deeply nourishing to our nervous system. So if you are a woman or if you have a woman in your life, this episode is definitely one that you want to listen to. I hope that you get as much value from this conversation as we did, and keep on listening as we dive right into it. Holly, thank you so much for making the time to be here in Sacred Leaders. I am so excited for this conversation and to have you here.
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited for this.
Yes, so let's dive right into it. When we were talking about what topics we could discuss in this conversation, one thing that stood out to me a lot was the good girl programming. And also you mentioned something around the compliant woman programming, and the devoted wife is what came to mind as you were saying that. So let's start there. What is the good girl programming? Tell us more about that.
Yes. Okay. So gosh, there's so many different jumping off points that we could go into, but just like a little bit of like the history around this. So my background as a coach, I was predominantly helping women who were struggling with body image. And body image is like an issue that 91% of women struggle with, like a significant portion of women struggle with body image. And when we think about statistics like that, it's impossible to consider that it's not a manifestation of nurture versus nature, right? That we're not actually born hating our bodies and wanting to change them, that is actually a systemic issue that is permeating our culture. And so when we think about the experience of body image and wanting to change our bodies, it's oftentimes because we want to fit into societal mold, right? We want to fit into an expectation. We want to be seen as good. We want to be seen as like, we're upholding what like the ideal woman is, right? And so that was really the crux of my work for a long time, until I started to get curious about, well, hey, it's not just with our bodies that we're doing this, right? I see women do this in their relationships and perhaps being the devoted wife, or in the way that they show up as mothers, or in their careers and pushing themselves to be kind of that boss bitch, overachiever type energy, or whatever it might, in exercise and whatever it might be, right? And so when I started to get really, really curious about this and consider, wow, we as women have been conditioned from really the time of our birth to live into the expectations of others, to not stray from the path, to not question or, step into the fullest expression of who we are as unique individuals. And that in many ways, we're expected to be obedient, that we're expected to adhere, that there's a prescribed set of rules for us to follow, and that it's actually really dangerous and confronting if we don't. And I'm sure we can get more into like the origins of that. And I also just want to say too, that because you mentioned the compliant woman piece of this, with good girl programming, I feel like it's one of those things when you hear it, it's like, oh, like it hits you, right? It's like, oh yeah, like I've been there before, right? But I also felt like in continuing to focus on good girl, that it was contributing to the infantilization of women. And I don't want to do that. And I really feel like with the work that I do with my clients, it's about helping them step into self-responsibility and owning their choices and their decisions and their behaviors. And so focusing instead on the compliant woman, right? Because the compliant woman suggests you're a whole adult, right? Who can take responsibility for her choices. And so we can get into all of that around the compliant woman. I have the 5 manifestations that I see most commonly show up. And yeah, let me know what you want to explore with anything that I just said.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the differentiation between the good girl and the compliant woman, because as you said, and I wouldn't have thought of this before, but really the energetics of it are so different from being the good girl, which has an energetic of victim, has an energetic of this is how it is, I don't have a choice, this is what I've fallen into, and poor little me, right? Versus compliant woman, which states and carries the energetics of you are a full adult and it is in your power to choose. You are choosing to comply, but there is a choice. You could intentionally and consciously choose something different. So I really wanted to highlight that because it's so powerful. And one thing that came to mind as you were sharing as well is something that I share a lot with my clients, especially when we dive into the topic of sisterhood and why there is such competition and distrust and wounding around the feminine towards other women. And I think it's important to really understand that it wasn't that long ago that women could not vote, could not work, could not sustain themselves and survive without the presence of a man in their lives. So we had to, as a matter of survival, straight to have a man that chose us as the one, the good enough to be chosen. And it was a matter of survival. It wasn't just a matter of feeling loved and feeling like we have our soulmate besides us. It was a matter of having a roof over our heads, a matter of not being raped on the streets, a matter of being able to feed our children. So this is a really big thing that we get to understand, because it goes beyond the fact that there are companies that are making billions of profit by making women feel bad about themselves. It goes beyond that. That is a huge part of it. But we get to understand that at its origin, there was a really real reason why we became the good girl, the compliant woman. And understanding that allows for the space to us to really see it and look at it with so much more compassion and understanding of where it comes from, and move in this new, more empowered way forward, knowing that it's not that we were weak. It's not that something was wrong with us. It's not that we just didn't get the badass gene in us. It's that we had to survive. And this is the way in which we chose to survive, which is why, and just to bring it full circle to what I said about sisterhood, this is why there is such rivalry still between women when it comes to men, when it comes to work, when it comes to so many different aspects, because we still carry that within ourselves, that feeling that to be the one, to be chosen as the one, is a matter of survival, of life or death. So it's important that we understand this.
Oh, I'm so glad that you presence that, because you're 1000% right. Like it's actually very recent history that we have the level of independence as women. And that is not true around the world, right? Like in Western culture, that might be true, but that's not true in every country by any means, or in every place around the world. And you know, the genes that have been passed down to us are the genes of the women that have complied. Right. So like, thank you to them, because that's what allowed us to get to where we are today. But I think for so many of us, we want to create a new legacy because we recognize, oh, like, okay, wonderful that we've been able to survive through that. And we can have massive compassion for ourselves. And like, let's create a new way of being. Let's create a new legacy that doesn't require us to compete with one another for resources, but actually can be much more collaborative and therefore sustainable and like energizing and nourishing.
Yeah, definitely a lot more nourishing for sure. Everything that you said, and nourishing. I feel like sisterhood and being able to stand in our sovereignty and have other women reflect that back to us and be in the same team versus against one another is one of the biggest medicines that we can offer ourselves. And it's something that I feel most women still haven't learned how to be with. But In saying that, I would love to hear more about the 5 manifestations that you talked about. Let's start with the individual journey. And if
Yes.
that takes us into sisterhood, that would be amazing. But I really want to hear, what are those manifestations?
Yes. Okay. So we can go through them. And then if, as I'm saying one, if you want to interject or have any thoughts on it, like please feel free. So the first one is self-silencing. And this is one that I absolutely struggled with myself. It's one that I still navigate. And it's one that I'm constantly supporting my clients in exploring. Somebody might also call this self-censorship. And this is where we might find ourselves perhaps quieting our more controversial opinions because they don't fit in with the norms of the day. You see this showing up a lot on social media, where we might just regurgitate opinions or regurgitate thoughts because we think it's the right thing to say versus our own well-formed, well thought out, critically thought through thoughts, right? We might also say yes when we really mean no, when we're self-silencing ourselves, right? And believing that our voices have no value. I see this happen so often for women that I'm working with, like, well, I'd really love to share on this, or I'd really love to be a leader in this space, but, I really just don't feel like my voice has any value. And so they silence themselves. And so much of this stems from, well, a lack of self-trust, right? But also from codependency. And codependency is a huge motivation, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, behind the compliant woman, right? When we are in codependence, we are making other people's perceptions of us or other people's feelings about us more important than the feelings, our own feelings or our own thoughts or our own truth, right? We're trying to protect other people. We're trying to avoid judgment. We're trying to manipulate other people's perceptions and appearances of us. And like self-silencing really serves that in a powerful way, because it's like, oh, I'm only going to show you, or I'm only going to say the things that will get me approval and acceptance versus what's actually nearest and dearest to my heart.
Yeah, it's a really big one, and it happens a lot. It
Yes.
definitely happens a lot. I have a mastermind called Embodied Woman, 6 month mastermind, and one of the months we dive just into this, and it's incredible to see how threatening to the nervous system sometimes it feels to be seen in that truth, to actually speak up for ourselves, how the lack of practice in it can make it feel like such a big thing and such a scary thing to actually say what we want to say what we mean, to express what we want, what we need, what we desire, to put something out there that isn't perfectly curated and that we haven't triple checked with someone else before voicing. So it's definitely a big thing. And I love that you bring this up, because I know a lot of women will resonate with this.
Absolutely. And we can share a little bit about what like possible solutions will be for that after we get into the other manifestations. So the second one is self-denial. And this is where you'll see a woman shoving down her big feelings, right? If she has like a pain or a trauma that she's been through, and she's just like, gonna kind of shove down the feeling. She's gonna like work through it, push through it. We also might see this showing up as like ignoring our body's needs for rest, or not trusting our intuition. And one of my favorite examples to use of self-denial is kind of a funny example for myself, is that I was out with a group of friends, like, gosh, this was many, many years ago, when it felt normal to be sitting in bars and booths and like on top of other people. And I was with a group of friends, and there was my friend sitting next to me. She spilled her drink. And when she spilled her drink, she spread her legs to avoid the drink falling in her lap. And as she did that, she slammed her very heavy boot down on my toe. And it was the most painful, like it was excruciatingly painful. And like inside of me, I was screaming in pain, yet I did not let a peep out of my mouth. Like I held it inside and was just like, it's okay. It's okay. And I did that because I didn't want her to feel bad. That was the only reason. I didn't want her to feel bad for stepping on my toe. So I denied myself, right? And so often we see that happen if somebody says something that really hurts our feelings, and we're like, oh, like they didn't mean it, or, it really wasn't that big of a deal. We deny how we actually feel in order to protect somebody else, right? So that's that codependency again.
Yeah. And I see that for a lot of people, it's also a fear of the too muchness. So we deny
Mm-hmm.
ourselves so that we don't come across as too much to the other person. I know this is one that I've loved doing for years. That's something that I have to really intentionally work my way out of, and still catch it sometimes how the ego would like to just it's okay, don't pay attention to that. I
Mm-hmm.
remember reading this book that spoke to this, and one funny example that the author was giving in the book, was about when women need to pee versus when men need to pee, and when women are hungry versus when men are hungry. This might not be an emotional representation, but it's still self-denial, right? So
Oh,
he
1000%.
was speaking
Yes.
about how if a guy needs to pee, that's the one thing he's gonna go do before anything else. If a guy is hungry, that's the one thing he's gonna go do before anything else. And of course, we're exaggerating and generalizing, but that will be the primary focus. Their single focus is I have a need, I need to meet it. Otherwise, I can't do anything else. Well, for us, so often, I would say more often than not, the default setting will be to push that aside because I'm busy or I'm in a flow. I get to get back to this email before I go pee. I get to reply to this text before I go pee, or I'll skip my meal because I don't have time because I'm doing this other thing. So it's so easy for us, even in these daily small, seemingly unimportant choices, to deny ourselves of things that are so crucial to our survival and our well-being.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think the peeing example, I mean, both peeing and the hunger piece are so key. But the peeing thing is really interesting because I remember being out to drinks with a good friend of mine who had, I know she'd been working on her codependency for a while. And we were in the middle of a conversation and she stopped me. She goes, I need to pee. She's like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I need to pee. And she literally got up and went to pee. And I was like, at first very confronted by it because like I wouldn't have allowed myself to like that's rude. That's rude of me to interrupt her. But she was like, I'm going to get my needs met right now. And I'm going to, and like, eventually I felt like a massive admiration for her. And then that's kind of what I started to practice myself. Like, because not only does it show up in like, oh, I got to keep being productive or just after this last email, but also when we're in social situations and we have a need, right? And we're afraid of like somebody thinking that we're rude or selfish or whatever it might be because we need to like take care of ourselves, we'll deny our needs.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed it, as I said, this has been a long journey for me working my way out of this pattern. And as of recently, I had to go into this low Fodmap diet just for a couple of months as they were trying to figure out what was going on with some gut issues I had. And I noticed this wanting to creep in again when I would go out or go to a friend's house for dinner. And there was such a long list of things that I couldn't eat. So there was this part of me that almost just wanted to bring my own food, don't make a big thing. Like, meanwhile, my friends were more than happy to cook whatever I could eat. They were inviting me for dinner. They knew I was on this diet. So it's just what it was. But I noticed the part of me that still felt so uncomfortable to take up that space and to just be with what I needed, and would have preferred, luckily I could see it, so I didn't allow for it to run the show. But this part of me would have preferred to just go with my own food to the dinner, or maybe not eat and then eat at home or something like that. So it's so powerful to have these little examples, because oftentimes I feel when we hear self-denial, we think that it has to be like this really big thing, but it's in the small little choices that we do every day that we can choose ourselves and choose to honor ourselves and have reverence for ourselves, or deny ourselves of what we truly need.
Yes. And what the message that sends us over time. Like I'm a big believer that it's like it's the old cliche that small hinges swing big doors, right? It's these small things that we do over time that actually lead to us one day, of course, perfectly imperfectly, being like, I get my needs met. And I have no problem, right? Inconvenient, quote unquote, inconveniencing someone or asking for my preferences because I know that I'm worth that.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, like I love that you mentioned these small, like getting up to pee when you gotta pee, feeding yourself when you need to feed yourself, saying no, like all of those things over time will lead to such a much more freeing experience.
Yeah, for sure. So moral of the story, sister, get up and pee when you need.
Yes, get up and pee. One takeaway.
Yes, for
Um,
sure. So tell me about the third one. I'd love to hear.
So the third one is self-sacrifice. And so this kind of trails with the self-denial piece of it. So this is when we have an inability to ask for help or for our needs to be met, right? When we're saying yes, when we really mean no, when we're giving up or pushing off our dreams or desires. And I see self-sacrifice show up a lot for the mothers that I work with, especially the mothers who are maybe new mothers who haven't really re-entered the workforce, or maybe are choosing a part-time work situation in order to be with their child, and will feel like, well, because I'm quote unquote, just a stay-at-home mom, I don't get to ask for help, right? I don't get to ask my partner for help. I don't get to, have a babysitter. I don't get to have somebody who can help me clean. I just have to do it all myself, right? And that's such an energy that I think so many of us as women have been taught to embody. Is just like, we sacrifice ourselves, right? We give of ourselves in order for others to feel nourished and nurtured and cared for. That's like what mothers and mothering is about, is sacrifice. And I just think that that's incredibly outdated and also not sustainable. Sure. But yeah, so like that's really where I see the self-sacrifice piece of it show up.
Yes, and it happens for all of us. And I love that you brought this up, because with the mothers is such a deeply ingrained thing that it's almost like, even I know this for myself with my clients and friends that have kids, even when the resources are there to, let's say, hire a cleaner and hire a nanny and have support of all these kinds, there's the guilt that comes with it, because we have been conditioned to think that in order to be a good woman, to be a good mother, to be the compliant woman that we didn't intentionally agree to being, but it's what we learned we had to be. We have to do it all by ourselves. And if there's no sacrifice, there's not that. And I actually had a ceremony once where I had this big journey of realizing that I had been self-sacrificing and making things a lot harder for myself that needed to be, because there was a story around how much my ancestors had sacrificed and how much the women in my lineage, the women before me, had suffered and how hard it was for them. So there was this part of me that here I am having an amazing life, living abundantly, having all of these beautiful opportunities and ways of doing my reality and doing life. And then finding myself creating scenarios where I could sacrifice a little and I could make things a little harder for myself so that I would feel loyal to the sacrifice that the women before me had endured, so that I could feel like a good woman, so that I could feel like I belonged, so that I could feel like I had earned it. So this is a really big piece, because when I saw this in my ceremony, I remember being like, whoa, this has impacted every single aspect of my life, so that I felt that I was doing the right thing. So that I felt like, well, here's all this abundance, here's all this amazingness that's happening for me in my life, but hey, I still have struggles. So then I'm safe to accept the amazingness of my life. Without struggles, then who am I? Am I doing the right thing? Am I being loyal? Am I going to be ostracized by other women? Am I going to be judged? Am I going to be pushed out of the nest or out of the community? Because who do you think you are? We're all suffering and sacrificing. So it's a big piece around that as well that I see, not only for the mothers, but for all of us, when things aren't flowing, when we catch ourselves doing things in a harder way than needed. Yes. When we catch ourselves having to push and hustle and everything is this uphill battle, I find that there's usually a tendency to replay this pattern of self-sacrifice. And a lot of the times, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I have found for myself and with my clients that a lot of the times there can be a loyalty towards family members and lineage and ancestors and even just the people around us, our partners, our friends, things like that.
Oh, 1000%, 1000%. I mean, I think I resonate with a lot of what you're sharing, because I'm of German American ancestry, and there's an energy in, I guess, German culture of like very hard and efficient work, right? Like, and that's something that I absolutely resonate with. And everyone in my family worked very, very hard, almost like my father, to the point of like breaking his body down. Like he worked that hard. And so that's something that I brought into my work all the time. Like in both when I worked in the fashion industry, because I had a whole career before becoming a coach where, I was showing up to work with appendicitis because like literally like needed to leave to go have surgery, like major surgery, and have an organ removed. But I like showed up to work because I was like, I have to be here for this handbag meeting, like the spring handbag line. I have to be here to plan it because I have to sacrifice my health and well-being to be here for my team. And yeah, there was the loyalty to the team. There's the loyalty to the energy of my family. And then, for those of us who are in the space holding coach healing world, I think that that's absolutely there. There is this mindset of, well, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to always be on, and you have to work really, really hard, and you have to push, and you have to strive. And I did that for many, many years. And I was like, wait a second, that's not actually working. Like, that's not actually what's like paying my bills and like allowing me to like support the amount of clients that I want to be working with. Like, it actually hinders me more than anything. But I think you're spot on, is that there's a loyalty to it. And then there's like, the word that the phrase that I want to use is like almost like a street cred thing. It's like, oh, I won't have credibility if I haven't suffered. And it's like, to some extent, suffering is a powerful teacher, but it's not the only way to earn credibility, right? We're also taught in this industry to tell our stories through the lens of our suffering. But what about telling the story through the lens of our joy or success, or like what's going really well for us? But it always comes off the back of suffering, right?
Yeah, totally agree. And I feel like it's something that we get to unlearn. Mm-hmm. It's so important that we do, because the hustle culture, the sacrificing, whether it is as a mother, as an entrepreneur, as a woman that's playing the archetype of the wounded healer, is just not serving anyone. Like, it actually isn't. And I know I have been able to experience how much more we can impact the world when we are operating from a space of bliss and pleasure and relaxation. And I actually have a daily note to myself when I write all of the things that I want to get done in a day. I actually have a note in like bold, capital, super big letters that says, are you contracting or are you relaxing? And it's this whole reminder to be like, okay, my default setting, because my nervous system was wired this way for decades before I started to do this work, because my mindset has been conditioned in this way for generations before me, because this is the imprint that I have carried in my DNA from my ancestors passed down to me, my default setting will be to go into self-sacrificing, to go into stressing, to go into hustling, to go into that. But that's not what I'm choosing. That is not what I'm choosing. And, for people listening that maybe go into thinking, well, I'm a mother of 3 and I don't have the resources to hire a nanny or hire a cleaner. Or I just started my business and I don't have the resources to hire a team or pay for all the platforms for automations and things like that. Because the ego loves to go into fighting for excuses and being in our excuses team, right? Finding all the reasons why, well, I have to self-sacrifice, I'm not going to change. If you're listening to this and there's a story that you can't do it differently, I really encourage you to write down all of the ways in which you do self-sacrifice and really check in with yourself honestly. Do you really need to continue choosing all of this? Because more often than not is our fear of what may be waiting for us on the other side of our patterns that gets in the way of us actually shifting, versus our environmental circumstances or the resources that are missing or lacking. So I know that you mentioned that you will bring some ways in which we can move out of this when we finish the 5 manifestations, but I really wanted to voice this because I know the ego loves to play for our excuses.
Oh yeah. I mean, victimhood is so seductive. It's so seductive. And we can just convince ourselves of like, I am a victim of this circumstance and there's no other possibilities like that. And we know that we're in victimhood when we're just saying, this is it. This is it. I have no choice. Right. But when we're actually able to step into what I know you talk about being like an embodied in our leadership, but I talk about with feminine freedom, like the adult woman, when we're able to like really step into that, we are able to access choice. Right. And even if the choices that are presented to us aren't like the most like amazing choices ever, like maybe you're not able to hire the nanny right away, or maybe you're not able to get all the automation systems right away. But like, if you're able to open and like expand your vision, there's so many possibilities that exist for you to receive help, right? And this is where we get to learn to ask, right? Asking for a friend, a mother, a parent, or like whoever to support with your children. Maybe it's also time, depending on how old your kids are, to offload some chores onto them, right? Maybe there's like free trials that you can try for automating things, or trades that you can do with other people. Like there's so many possibilities that exist when we're able to get out of victimhood.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It starts with that choice to stop self-sacrificing and start self-honoring, for sure.
Absolutely. I love that.
Tell me about the fourth.
So the fourth one is self-limitation. And this is where we will see women downplaying their strengths, right? So I did a post on this recently because I had somebody reflect back to me that they thought that I was really eloquent when I was speaking about something. And my initial reaction was to be like, oh no, like I was all over the place and I stumbled over my word. Like that was my initial reaction, was to downplay it. Right. And instead, because I've been doing this work on myself, I was like, thank you. Thank you for saying that. It feels so wonderful to be seen by you in that way. But so often we are like, our initial response is to be like, oh, no. I'm not that good at that. Oh, I could be way better. Or, oh, she's way better at that than I am. Right. This is where we like really downplay what's possible for us. And we go into that story of like, I don't know enough. I'm not enough. This is where you'll see like the compulsive course and training taking, right? Like, let me just take this one more course. Let me just take this one more training, right? Because I don't know enough. And then ultimately where we just play really small, where we might not put ourselves out there for opportunities. Like, let's say like me reaching out to be on your podcast and inviting you to be on mine, right? Like playing small and not even opening up that possibility for myself was like an old way of being when I was a compliant woman, right? And so, yeah, like that's sort of how we see self-limitation show up.
Yeah, I love that. And this is, it's something that I feel every single one of us does until we consciously choose to unplug from this way of being. Like this is such a big one. And it reminds me of something that one of my mentors mentioned to me. It feels like 1,000 years ago, so I'm probably going to reinvent what she said, but it was something along the lines of, there have been scientific studies that, or behavioral studies, I guess in this case, that have, through studying the behavior of little girls and little boys, discovered that there is a specific point in time, I think it's around the 9 years old mark, where little girls will go from feeling so excited about sharing how good they are at everything and wanting to be seen, and look at me dancing, and look at me, I learned to do this thing, and look at me, I'm doing this other thing, to actually bring it all back and starting to be a lot more shy when it comes to sharing their gifts and their talents. So it's almost like at some point we learn that little boys won't like us. And again, I'm having this conversation and it can feel quite exclusive of women that are in relationship with women. I'm just talking about this study because this is how I learned it. But I imagine it's the same for little girls that like little girls. In saying this, they learn that, well, I won't be liked if I am the one that's good at all of the things. So little boys find it annoying, little girls find it threatening. So there's this story that my friends won't want to be my friends, and they won't want to play with me, and they won't like me, and they won't include me if I'm the one that's good at all the things. So what she was mentioning, again, I wish I could remember so I could actually bring this as it was said to me, but it was so many years ago. But there was a story around the girls understanding, and I guess we also learn this by looking at our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunties and our mother's friends and things, just the women in our lives. We learn that it is not seen as sexy and desirable and compliant and good enough to actually go, hey, I am a badass rock star at all of the things. So what you mentioned to me is that at that point, we choose one or two things, choose a couple of things. And those are the things that we pursue, that we allow others to see us in. But then the others is like too much. So you have to pick a couple of things, right? And I know for myself, by the time I was 19 years old, I could speak 7 languages, and I taught myself 5 of them. So I was super obsessed with languages. I loved languages, and I just wanted to learn more and more and more. Now, this is something that I barely ever talk about. And I realized that there's this part of like, well, this is not relevant, and like, it's too much, it's not relevant to my work, who cares? Like, and then people will be surprised because I'll be speaking to all these different people in their native languages when there's the opportunity. But it's something that I don't mention about myself. Okay, it's not relevant. It's true, it's not relevant to every conversation. In saying that, I noticed the discomfort that would come for me back then when someone would mention it to someone else. Did you know that Sigrid speaks 7 languages? Do you know that she told herself? Do you know that she learned this language in like 2 weeks? Do you learn that? And that put me in such an uncomfortable situation, right? So when my mentor mentioned this to me, I remembered looking back at my life, at all of the ways in which I had done this. And now, of course, I can see it in so many of my clients, if not every single one, how we pick the couple of things that we think are clearly our dharma, or really likable, really honorable, safe enough, sort of mainstream enough, are going to give us profit and money and success, and therefore safety and stability. And we go for those ones. But we don't talk about everything else. We don't talk about how we have all these talents and gifts. We don't talk about our medicine being so potent. We don't talk about the things that we love about ourselves. We don't talk about all these different things. And like you were saying, we downplay ourselves and also hide aspects of ourselves in fear that we won't belong if we're just our most shiny self, which to me is fascinating.
Oh, that's so fascinating, and it hits on something here that I think is so well, there's like the jealousy piece of it, right? Like we don't want to be the source of someone else's jealousy, because that in some way makes us responsible for their quote unquote pain, even though their jealousy is their responsibility, right? And we don't want to be seen as boastful. We don't want to be seen as like arrogant in some way. And like that's what's sort of understood, culturally understood, societally understood about sharing our gifts and talents. Yet I also just feel like what a disservice it is for us to not share what we're really good at. Right? Like, who does that actually serve? It doesn't serve anyone for us to actually hide that part of ourselves and to hide the fullness of who we are with all of the mainstream things that we can do that like are sort of palatable, and the parts of ourselves that are quirky or different or really, really freaking talented or cool, right? Like you speak 7 languages, like that's freaking incredible, right? Like that's like, I'm so impressed by that. And now I'm at a place where I actually really love to be impressed by other women. Like I love to hear about their gifts and their talents because it inspires me. I'm like, shit, like I want to go learn another language, right? Yeah. And so can we also consider that when we stop limiting ourselves or stop expecting women to limit themselves, right? If we also have discomfort with another woman being in her fullness, like that's really, really good information for us. And can we actually see that as an opportunity to celebrate her and to let her mirror back to us what's possible versus being stuck in like oh, well, I guess I'll just never be as good as Sigrid because of that. Right. And so therefore I shouldn't even put myself out there.
Yeah. It's such an important thing, and it's something that will create such healing, such a ripple effect in the world when we choose it, because it starts there. It starts with us choosing that we get to be a stand, not just for us and our talents and our gifts, but for the talents and gifts of our future little girls and future little boys, and for those of us that want to be mothers, for those of us that don't want to be mothers. It's for the future generations, for our sisters, for our aunties, for our cousins, for our friends. Really choosing that enough is enough. And like you were saying, I also love to get inspired and feel this admiration and inspiration that comes when I see a woman shining and really being in her gifts. And the more we reject the idea that we have to play small in order to allow others to feel safe or to babysit other people's wounded egos, the
Yes.
more we can all rise up. Because if I have all these talents and all these gifts and all of these things that inspire me and excite me that I could be sharing with the world as medicine and service, but I keep it to myself because I'm scared that maybe Holly will feel jealous or Holly will go through her own process, then I'm not only doing a disservice to myself and to all of the people that could receive something from my medicine, but I'm doing a disservice to you because I could be inspiring you, and I'm putting you as an example, of course, but I
Yes.
could be
Yes.
inspiring
Yes.
you into this action. So when we do this, we're not just doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for one another. Being a stand for our gifts is being a stand for all of us women and ultimately men to stand up and rise up to our fullest potential and move past these old conditioned ways of perpetuating the wounds of the ego that aren't serving anyone. They're not
No.
helping anyone.
No, we think that they are. We think when we're in our codependency in that way, and like what you said, babysitting other people's wounded ego, like we think that that's generous, right? Like we think that
Yeah.
that makes us good, the good girl. Like, oh, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I don't want anyone to feel this way. Let's like just call it what it is. You can't actually prevent someone from feeling anything. That's not your responsibility, right? Anytime somebody says, I don't want them to feel this way, I'm like, not your job.
Yeah.
Like, not your job. And that doesn't mean that you walk around being callous and rude to anyone. But like when it comes to you bringing your gifts, your talents, stating your desires, asking for your needs to be met, sharing your big feelings, being who you are, right? Other people's perceptions, other people's projections, other people's feelings and thoughts and opinions about that are their responsibility. It's their work. We can't, and actually thinking that we can take that on from them is doing them a disservice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I've mentioned to a few clients that have been in this situation before is really what part in us feels so important and so like everything revolves around us that we have to give charity to the other person by curating our experience of how we show up in the world so that we can do them a favor and keep them safe. Like also like what's that in us,
Right.
because
Like,
that's an
what's
ego
that?
trip. That's a very
Oh,
big ego trip. Like I'm
yes.
going to, because I have so much power and I am so important, I am going to do this thing and sacrifice myself so that I can provide safety, the illusion of safety for this other person. Like jump off your ego trip. You know,
Yes.
everyone's on their sovereign journey, and if people have to play out their wounds until they get tired of them or go and get support so that they can actually grow out of them, then that's their own sovereign journey.
Yep.
But in order to do that, we get to honor ourselves and be authentic in our expression. And
Mhm.
oftentimes I feel like the ego loves to go into that story of the good compliant woman of I'm just so good that I don't want to trigger anyone, when in reality it's like I don't feel good enough and I don't feel safe enough to honor my gifts. I'm scared as shit to put myself out there and honor the bigness of me. And because of that, it's easier to tell myself the story that I'm doing it for charity, I'm doing it because I'm such a good person, than actually having to look at myself in my shadows and do something about it.
Yeah. That's it. That's it right there. It's actually like we think we're being so charitable, we think we're being so giving, but we're actually being very selfish. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to like, oh, like I've had my coach reflect those types of things back to me before. Like you're actually taking someone's power and keeping them from having their feelings. Like you are taking someone's power away. You're actually being really selfish and you're saying you know better than them. And I'm like, oh, like that hurts. That hurts. But that's what like I'm actually doing. I'm not actually being like supportive of somebody else and being of service to them by robbing them of having their full feelings, their full, process. Yeah. It's such a fascinating
It's a big one.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And one more thing I want to say on this topic is, and some people will understand this, some people will question this, but there are no others. And this is something that the more I dive into this understanding, the more I come to a space of liberation and freedom within myself. Because yes, from a dualistic perspective and this 3D world that we live in, we are separate from one another. And you're you, and I am me, and I have my own trips, and you have your own trips, and I have my wounds, and you have yours, and I have my talents, and you have yours. But ultimately, people are just mirrors.
Mm.
And if we really, really, really take this on board, we can create a space for such deep, profound, transformational healing for ourselves, because there are no others. So this idea that, and I've been there, I've been this person that wants to give charity to others through keeping myself small. It's been a big story that I have loved for many years. But to understand that, to think that I am playing small so that somebody else feels safe is nothing but I am playing small so that I feel safe. So every time that we think we are doing something because of someone else, because of something else, the most powerful thing we can ever do is to actually turn the eye around, start living from the inside out, and realize and remember that people are in their own reality tunnels, they're having their own lives, and they're nothing but mirrors. So everything that triggers you about someone else, everything you fear that someone else will feel or think, everything that you think someone else expects of you, is nothing but your own trip. So the
Yes.
more you can really take this on board, the sooner you can take this on board, the sooner you can start actually empowering yourself and growing out of these patterns.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's so beautifully expressed.
Yeah,
Shall we get into the final
please.
manifestation? Let's do it. Okay. So the last one is self-questioning. And this is where we will see our good old friend imposter syndrome show up. This is where we'll also see someone constantly changing their mind, right? So if you are like, I saw this a lot with my clients who are coaches, like, oh, I want to be in this niche. No, I'm going to do this niche. Or, I want to do this thing, or I want to do that thing. We're constantly changing our mind so we don't have to commit to something because we're questioning our ability and our talents, kind of like what we were talking about before. And then self-questioning also shows up as outsourcing our inner knowing. So this shows up as like chronically asking for advice. It's like when you need your mom, your aunts, your sisters, your best friend's opinion before putting on an outfit and going on the first date, right? Like you need everyone else's opinions. And again, getting advice and opinions from trusted people that you respect and have your best interests at heart is not a bad thing by any means. But can we also be aware of our own internal knowing and trust that as well?
Yeah, such a big one. And I love that you brought the different examples from the professional perspective in terms of imposter syndrome and not really sticking to one thing, so that we don't actually have to put our trust and our going all in into something. And then from the more personal perspective, because it shows up in so many different ways. And I feel like when we talk about imposter syndrome, we only think about the professional field, but there is so much that shows up. It shows up in dating, it shows up in relationships, it shows up in friendships, it shows up in everything that we do. And I know this was true for myself like a decade ago, back in the days of corporate and the life that I had back then. I would have conversations with someone and then catch myself at night while I was falling asleep, replaying the conversations and wondering how I could have said something better and what I should have said instead. And sometimes having conversations in my mind, like for weeks before actually having the conversation. And like, I haven't been so much one to ask for other people's opinions. But I definitely replayed and questioned and tried to curate the perfect thing to say and do, like times in advance before doing it. And when that piece went, when that pattern disappeared and I was able to really free myself from it, I don't want to say I'm 100% out of it, because I will give myself the grace and the chance to it reappearing at some point. But when that stopped being there on my daily, weekly experience, so much space opened up. like it was the biggest weight lifted off my shoulders.
Mm. Oh, yes. I resonate with that a lot. I would call it, it's not my before bed conversations, it's my shower conversations, right? Like when you're in the shower and you're like,
I love to sing
I'm
in the
gonna
shower. So.
replay that conversation that I had where I
Yeah.
could have had that comeback, or I could have said that thing, or,
Yeah.
practicing the difficult conversation that needs to be had, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't trust ourselves, right? We don't trust ourselves to be able to have said exactly what needed to be said in that moment, and trust that our intuition guided us to say, our voice, our powerful voices guided us to say exactly what needed to be said in that moment. Right. So we'll just like spend all of this energy and brain space, like questioning that, or, I see that show up for some people in my life where they like, they socially question themselves a lot, where they'll be in social situations like, did I say too much?
Mm.
Did I embarrass myself? Did I, did I fit in with the crowd? Right. They're constantly questioning themselves instead of just being themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That was another favorite of mine. Did I take too much space? Did I talk too much? Did I say too much?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I speak about myself a lot? That was
Did I
definitely a
talk
thing.
about myself too much? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
for
Oh, yeah.
sure. For sure. And it shows up in so many different ways. It's such a liberating thing to actually work through this, because it shows up in everything that we do. And I've noticed even in my work, once that was gone, so much more potency could come through, because I don't plan, even when I have, public speaking engagements, or I coach at someone's coaching program, or do mentoring sessions for someone else's event or something like that. I have a few bullet points of what I want to go into, but I don't ever plan what I'm going to say. I allow myself to just flow with what's present. And that is so much more potent than when back in the day I used to try to have this full presentation of what I'm going to say, and the jokes I'm going to say, and the things and the questions and all of that. And that just didn't flow. Like, it was beautiful, and, it served the purpose. But ever since that was out of the way, my work became so much more potent, because I could really be present with the space, with the energy of the moment, with the present experience that I was having, and also tuning to the people that were around me, versus having a pre-created boxed thing that I was going to deliver.
Yes, yes. Oh, I resonate with the plan jokes. I had so many of those for talks that I had done in person. I'm like, okay, this is where I'm going to say this joke. Pause for laughter, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. So I want to hear, and of course, just being mindful of your time, but I would love to hear, even if it's just in a quick way, some of the ways in which we can start turning around each of those manifestations for the women listening, that they can take some tangible takeaways, things that they can start doing to shift these patterns.
I love that. And again, just speaking to the fact that like awareness is number one. Awareness is the first thing. And that's what we just did. Like we just went through that whole list, and we went through fast. And for some of you, you might be like, oh, I'm so confronted with like all of this. Like I know as I
Preach.
was pulling it together, like the only reason I'm able to spitball these and come up with these is because I lived it, right? Like this has been me. And again, perfectly imperfect, having grace for myself. Yeah, I fall back into these patterns from time to time, but awareness is so powerful because of what it means in terms of taking responsibility, right? Once we know, we can make a conscious choice to be different, but also having patience with ourselves to know that these patterns likely started at a very tender young age, 3, 4, 5. And if you're someone who's like 30, 40, 50, you have decades of programming to undo. So like patience and like allowing for it to unfold, and not expecting yourself to like suddenly have it perfect overnight. And if we started with like the self-silencing piece of it, when I started working, realizing that I was someone who censored myself in social situations, in my online work, that I expected myself overnight to be able to hop online and share my controversial opinions. And you know what? I didn't do it. I didn't do it because I was way too much for my nervous system, way too much change for my nervous system to take on then and there. But what I did do is I found my one trusted friend that I knew like, oh, this woman loves me no matter what. Like, no matter what, if she thinks I'm horribly wrong, she loves me. Right. And I went to her and I was like, hey, can I share some of this with you? Or I'd share some writing with her. Like, hey, I wrote this. Can I share this with you? And I just like, without needing her to tell me I was right, I just being witnessed by her was so healing for that part of me that was afraid to be seen expressing my voice. And so that was the small thing that I did that actually led to me being able to share some of my less popular opinions more publicly. Right. And that took me probably a year to be able to get to that point.
I love that. Yeah. Really big one for sure.
Yeah. And so with the self-denial piece of it, I think we kind of like nailed it with the pee thing, like pee, like get up, go to the bathroom. But if we can, again, like we're not going to go from feeling codependent or guilty around sharing our big feelings to suddenly being able to fully express them to everyone or the important people in our lives. Like it's just not going to happen like that. But if we do these smaller check-ins with our bodies throughout the day, am I hungry? Like, what am I needing right now? What am I feeling and what do I need? That's a question that I love to give to my clients. What am I feeling and what do I need in this moment? And it could be like, I need a stretch, right? It could be, I need a pee, right? And it could be, I'm feeling content or I'm feeling nothing, right? But just these like small check-ins over time will allow us to get to that place where we're able to really access our deeper feelings.
Yeah, I even encourage a lot of my clients to set alarms when this is so out of practice, when we're so out of practice with this, to set several alarms a day for that, for actually checking in. What am I feeling? What do I need? But actually having the designated time, because otherwise we can forget, but actually having your phone go out 3 times a day at least to ask yourself and get in the habit of asking those questions is so powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And then when it comes to self-sacrificing, I think we really went into this with like noting victimhood, right? Noting that when we're in a place of there's no other option here, that we're likely in victimhood. And if we can kind of lift that veil or just pretend for a second, put on like our big girl pants, right? Our empowered woman pants, and just say like, okay, what other possibilities am I willing to see here? Right? What other possible ways could I get support in this situation with my business, with my children, with the cleaning, with whatever it might be, right? We have to be willing to open up possibilities for ourselves and take responsibility for when we're being in victimhood.
Yeah, for sure. Love that.
Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to self-limitation, I think that this can be really fun way to play with ourselves and with our girlfriends and other women in our lives. So I give my clients a practice often of self-validation and looking at validating themselves at least once per day. This might be part of a journal practice. Maybe it's a setting an alarm on your phone type thing where you're going to just take a second and be like, I'm going to acknowledge myself for drinking water today, right? Or I'm going to acknowledge myself for being patient in that conversation, right? I'm going to acknowledge myself for that talent that I have, and really taking some time to acknowledge ourselves while also practicing at the same time, acknowledging someone else in our lives. And so connecting with a girlfriend and telling her what you admire about her, what you love about her can be a really beautiful way to heal this wound that exists between women that we have to compete with each other.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I have been in the practice of this different times in my life. And it is so powerful, as simple as it sounds, to voice out loud something that we acknowledge ourselves for, and to get in the practice of really acknowledging one another. And I feel like oftentimes we can get used to maybe compliment each other on our achievements and things like that, celebrate the things that are more tangibly, publicly out there. But to acknowledge ourselves for who we are is so deeply healing. So I love that.
Yes. And then for the last one, self-questioning. So this is one where we probably have to spend a lot of time rebuilding trust, right? If we have outsourced our our intuition, if we have relied heavily on validation or the opinions of others, right, in order to make decisions for our lives, it's going to take some time to feel comfortable not questioning ourselves anymore and building trust with ourselves. And I want to be mindful of calling out that I'm saying building trust, right? Trust is something that's earned, not just granted. Right. So it's something we actually have to build with ourselves, especially if we've severed it and broken our word to ourselves time and time again. And so one way that you can start to do that is not in every situation, but in a situation where you're like tempted to be like, I need this person to tell me that this is the right choice, to actually maybe sit with this actually is the right choice for me, and I'm going to make it without the feedback of somebody else. You don't have to do that for everything, but just trying with practicing with one thing. I'm not going to get feedback. I'm not going to get advice. I'm not going to look for approval or validation. I'm just going to do the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And we can start with little things like you were saying, the outfit or those little things that are not so maybe threatening to our nervous system, and they can feel as threatening, but just start with whatever feels safer. I feel like one important piece that you brought up in the first one is around the understanding that we won't go from 0 to 10. I see this especially in the personal development industry. There is a misconception oftentimes around sharing being the most empowering thing. And in order to prove our authenticity and to prove our power and to prove our potency, we have to share. We have to be willing and able to share everything and anything. Any experience we went through, every trauma we've overcome, all of the things. And there's a couple of things that I would like to mention around this. First of all, we get to have boundaries. We get to choose what's for us and what's for social media, what's for the world. I feel like because the coaching, healing, personal development industry has moved so heavily into these platforms of podcasting and YouTubing and social media, all of these things, we have gotten used to looking at people and almost sometimes bypassing what's their actual experience as a coach or a healer. What are their actual qualifications? Do they know what they're doing versus do they look cool? Do they have a great story? A lot of people have great stories and know very well how to sell their stories, but have no fucking idea what they're doing when it comes to coaching. So it's important to really knowing that we get to have boundaries. There are a lot of things that I don't share on social media, and not because I want to hide or because I haven't processed them or I feel any shame around them, but because I have my boundaries around what I want to experience in my life and what I want to share. And some things I just don't feel like for them to be for the entire 8 billion people in the world.
No.
Sometimes things are just for ourselves. So that's the first thing. And also understanding that there is a thing that we can fall into with wanting to compensate out of shame. So when we have shame or we have fear, we have overwhelm around expressing or sharing or being witnessed and seen in certain things, some coaches will encourage us to go the whole opposite direction, like from 0 to 100. If you have fear to share this thing, now go and make a live and share it in front of everybody now. If you have shame around this thing, now go and be witnessed on it in the most extreme version. And for some people, this can be really powerful and it can actually support them. I've seen it work with a lot of people. But what it can also create is an overcompensation where now we've gone from 0 to 10 without actually allowing our nervous system to catch up, to build that sense of safety so that we can feel regulated and harmonized in that new version or experience of ourselves. And then that dysregulation, that feeling of being unsettled and being unsafe and now being so exposed, can create even more shame and can then make us fall into this pattern or this wheel of having to constantly show up as the person that shares and shares and shares and shares to bypass the shame and the sensitivity that we're actually feeling. So it's important to know that our nervous system needs to feel safe in order for us to truly, in an integrated, embodied way, be, have, do, or pursue something. So if we don't feel safe in our nervous systems, the mindset work is really cool. The positive affirmations will be cool. We can even force ourselves to do something and share the controversial topic like you were saying, or share the different opinion. But if we're not catching our nervous systems up, we will constantly feel out of place. We will constantly feel unintegrated. We will feel disembodied. We will feel ungrounded. And we will be in this constant battle of, now I feel empowered because I shared, but now I have vulnerability hangover. And now I'm going to push myself to share so that I get out of it, but now I feel even more shame. So there is no integration and there is no healing in that, which I really wanted to highlight, because I know this is a big one in the personal development industry. And sometimes the journey is slow, and slow is fast. Less is more. We get to do things in a way that are deeply nourishing and compassionate and embracing of our path and our pace, versus forcing ourselves to just be done. I don't want to be the good girl anymore. I don't want to be the compliant woman anymore. Just get me the fuck out of here. It's not going to work, and it's not going to be sustainable.
Oh no, it's just going to shift one from one fundamentalism to the other, or one wound to the other. Like that's what happened for me. Like I was healing all these surface things. I was like, I'm going to heal my body image. And once I heal my body image, it was about healing my productivity wounds and all of that. Like it just switches from one thing to another without getting to the actual root. When we're going from like, okay, I listened to one podcast, or I did one training or whatever, and I'm done. I don't need to look at it anymore. And now I'm ready to put it out into the world and help other people with it. And it's like, oh, it doesn't work that way. Right. Like we have to trust our process. We have to slow down. And we also have to know that sometimes the work is just going to be for us. Right. Like it does, like every process that we go through, every healing journey that we go on doesn't have to be shared on social media. People will notice it and they'll see how you are different, how you show up differently, but let's not put the pressure on ourselves to actually be able to curate something to put out on social media to share with people, our big our big revelations, right? It's like sometimes it's personal and it's just for you.
Yeah. And even when we choose to share, what I encourage everyone is to really treat your healing and treat your journey of empowerment, of liberation, of transformation with reverence and care. Like become intimate with that part of you that is healing, become intimate with that part of you that is growing, with that part of you that is evolving or being uncovered, because we can bypass our journey by doing the journey publicly on social media, sharing the quote before we embody the quote, sharing the story before we integrate the story. And I don't necessarily have anything against people that want to share all of their stuff on social media. Go for it if that feels authentic. But from a space of knowing how juicy and healing and beautiful and exquisite it can be to really get to connect with ourselves and our journey in this depth, I would encourage everyone to not miss that. Not miss that part. Like make sure that you are doing the healing for yourself, because that's actually why you're doing it. It's cool if you can create, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars through supporting others as a result of your own work, but start with you. That's actually why we're here. This journey is about you and you. And oftentimes we can be so detrimental to ourselves and to our healing journey and block our healing journey because we're trying to do it so that we can share it, so that we can look a certain way, so that we can tell other people how to do it, so that, and again, coming back to there is no others. What are you here for? Why are you doing the healing? If it's just so that you can write a cool book, then you're never actually going to heal. If it's just so that you can tell a great story on a podcast, you're never actually going to heal. So my invitation, just for anybody listening, sister to sister, like really please gift yourself the gift of becoming intimate with your own healing journey, with yourself, because it is such a precious thing.
Oh, it's so sacred. I love that you presence that. I love that you shared that. That feels really, really potent.
Yeah. Thank you, love. Like there is so much more that we could go into. I feel like this conversation could go on for hours and days, but I'd love to hear, how can people follow your work, hear more about what you've got to share, and work with you?
Yeah. So the easiest way to get in touch with me would just be on Instagram. I have a complicated relationship with Instagram, but I do show up there. And it's just holly.toronto. And Toronto is just like the Canadian city. I'm not from Toronto, but it's just my last name. And I also have my own podcast with Sigrid that's going to be on. I think your episode is going to come out in early December. So my podcast is called Return to Wholeness. And this is where we talk about the ways in which we have fragmented ourselves in order to live into the expectations of others, and how we can call those parts of ourselves back so that we can live from a place of wholeness. And so it's my greatest joy to run that podcast. I love it so much. So you can head to that, Return to Wholeness, my Instagram. And then I'm unsure when this is airing, but right now I'm only taking private clients. I'm not doing any group offerings right now. And as we're recording this, I only have 2 spots open in my private coaching practice, and in my private work, we're working on deconstructing the compliant woman so we can step into feminine freedom, reclaim your voice, your intuition, and your power so that you can live fully as the feminine free being that you are. So yeah, that's me.
I love that. I love that. And I'm going to leave all of the links for your podcast and Instagram, all of the things in the show notes as well. And the last question that I love asking everyone that comes into the show is, in your opinion, what makes a leader sacred?
Oh God, I love this question so much. When I've heard you ask it on your podcast before, and I actually tried not to prepare for it so that it could come more from the heart. But what I feel makes a sacred leader is the ability to hold space for another human being in their messy human wholeness, their complexity, their nuance, all of them, and bring grace and love and joy to their journey without bringing our own agenda in. Like one of the things that I always say about when choosing a leader, it's you don't need to choose somebody who's exactly like you, right? Who thinks exactly like you. You want to work with somebody who's going to be so committed to who the fullness of who you are is that they get their own shit out of the way. And so that they can hold space for you in that way. And that's what I think makes a leader sacred.
Yeah, definitely important. I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Holly, for your time, for everything that you do as your own sacred leader, and for all of the work that you are putting out in the world and all of the wisdom that you shared in this episode. I'm really excited to share this conversation with my listeners.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you listening. I'll see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this video and got lots of value from it. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for many more value-packed free videos, and share this with anyone in your life who can also get value from it. If you want to get access to all of my free resources and connect, check out the links in the caption. Thank you again, and I will see you on the next video.